welcome to this panel on public trust and the effective advertising experience. I'm Gideon Spanier, the UK Editor-in-Chief of Campaign, and I'm pleased to welcome an all-star panel: Kerry Chilvers, who's Brand Tribe Leader at Direct Line Group, Jerry Dakin, who's EMEA Senior Media Director at GSK, and Sue Yuneman, who's Chief Transformation Officer at Mediacom. Well, I want to kick off by saying we know that COVID-19 has caused so much disruption. We're still dealing with both the health crisis and the economic fallout. So, Kerry, how much do you think trust is actually at the top, or should be at the top of people's in trays at the moment?
It should still be right at the top of our entries. COVID has exacerbated the trust issue we have. Latest Edelman research showing that it's leads to a decline in trust, and actually particularly in this context, a decline in trust in governments, a decline in trust in NGOs and in media. And business is now the most trusted sector, and is actually seen as the only one that's both ethical and competent. And that gives us a real opportunity as advertisers as we head into a recessionary environment, where we know we've got a really strong role for growth, is to really make sure we double down on our trust agenda.
And Jerry, GSK involved in healthcare, I can see why trust is important. But we're dealing with, as we look into 2021, how high is trust in your in tray or your brand's in tray?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a macro sense, like trust and even like disinformation things is right at the top. I take the point that in this difficult year, which it still is, that you have to bear in mind that people's time, people's energies is quite stretched. So it's often hard to prioritize these things. At the same time, I think in the wake of disruption, you get a big opportunity to reset. And here we are, a conference called Reset. So for me, it remains really near the top. And as I think, a lot of things have changed. We're trying to do a lot of things different, agile way. Why not put it at the heart of that? Why not, build a new way of doing things with trust at the heart of it?
And Sue, you at Mediacom, you work with a number of different clients, and to what extent is trust at the top of the agenda for them and for you? There's so many other things that clients have to worry about.
I think trust is one of the rare, precious commodities because, of course, you have to earn it. You can't advertise your way into a trusted position. You can't, of course, just use the words, trust me, I work in advertising. That's not going to get you very far at the moment. So it's something that needs to be earned. It's not something that you can necessarily buy. And therefore, for all of us, I think it is very much at the top of our agendas. It's an interesting debate bringing in Brexit, bringing in COVID-19, because what we're also looking to do is to advertise effectively, spend money effectively. And the way in which we can earn trust is going to make that more or less effective.
Well, it's an interesting thing because in all the research, which I know the Advertising Association and others have done, the experience of advertising is so important. And we've been hearing a lot about issues like bombardment and excessive frequency for several years. It's been a priority. So I'm going to go back to Kerry on this because I know Direct Line has done some work on this in the past about the experience of advertising. And I guess the question is does our industry really care about this? Because ultimately the public's experience of advertising has a big impact on their levels of trust.
To be honest, it's going to vary by advertiser. Different advertisers have different priorities and different agendas, but for us, the issue of trust really is, it makes really good business sense. This isn't just about us doing the right thing for the industry or for consumers at large. Excessive frequency for us, bombarding customers, is just an unnecessary cost. It's an opportunity to reduce some marketing expense in some area and spend it in another, which is good business sense. Why do I want to hit you with an ad 20 times when 2 will do? and I can save that investment and reinvest it elsewhere. And so for us, why should you care? Because it's not just about doing the right thing. This is about good business sense, eliminating wastage and having more money to reinvest into other channels.
And Jerry, I'm intrigued to know, because there have been times when a lot of brands stopped advertising in certainly the worst of 2020. So I certainly found an experience where sometimes I was getting a very high frequency from brands still willing to advertise. May have been the channels I consumed. And I'm thinking of things like gaming. There are lots of areas where there's quite a lot of frequency. And yet I think the consumer thinks of all advertising as being quite a similar experience. Does the industry truly care about the experience of advertising?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that was just said. I mean, I'm a big advocate for 1+ reach as well, and trying to reach as many people as possible. I think it was a strange year for media buying. There were times when we had much higher frequency than that this past year, because TV stations and other platforms were willing to give it to you. But I think there's a bigger sort of social contract with advertising. It's worth thinking about. One of the reasons TV is really effective is that people trust what they see on TV. They understand that that advertising on TV, as seen on TV, brings you a certain kind of quality. It brings you a certain kind of, and there's also that sort of user exchange between people. Understand they watch good content, they get adverts, and it's it's a fair exchange. And in the sort of the digital ecosystem in particular, where it's not just in digital, but in digital there is a real issue. We haven't necessarily got that balance always right, where some advertisers, and obviously it depends a bit on your sector and your mindset and your goals. But I think it can be dangerous to kind of chase KPIs and chase numbers and not think about the user experience, because, and as Kerry says, it comes back to the user experience, but also the advertiser effectiveness, the advertiser value. You would rather have fewer impressions on the same person that had bigger impact and that didn't bombard them. But you'd also rather that consumers trusted your advertising and paid some attention to them.
Well, on the plus side, if I can use this, I mean, Sue, you mentioned earlier that trust in advertising isn't that high. There is actually some evidence which shows that trust has improved a little bit, I think, in the last couple of years. And I wondered, if you were to take a positive, where have you seen, perhaps from your clients? Actually, I know Direct Line as a client. Where have you seen maybe change in behaviour? Because obviously clients can lead the way here, but you advise them.
So there is a big difference between advertising in the biggest sense of the word, advertising as the consumer or the person on the bus, although they're probably not necessarily going on the bus at the moment, but the cliche was the person on the number 13 bus. If they are, they'll be wearing a mask, I hope. How they think of advertising in general, because that means all of the advertising that they ever see wherever they are, whether they're on TV or whether they're looking at their phones. And there's a big difference between trust in that and then trust in quality blue chip advertisers who know what they're doing. Trust in an advertiser like Direct Line that has a balanced objective between long-term and short-term objectives, that understands the impact of brand and performance on each other, and who balances it and who caps frequency to make sure that they get the best outcome. And of course, at MediaCom, what we do is we give our clients investment advice, and we can't bear, I mean, this is probably a deep-rooted media thing, kind of like I was a TV buyer when I started out. Can't bear to have money wasted. I mean, that's not helping anybody. You want to get the best return on investment, and that means capping frequency and understanding frequency bands. But I think there's a difference between that and what happens when you go out and you just talk to people about what their experience of advertising is, because it's not necessarily on TV that they find it intrusive. And as you know, of course, there's still a limit to the number of TV ads per break on broadcast television, versus the experience that they feel when they're using an app on their mobile phone and they happen to have their fingers quite big and they happen to click onto an advert that they didn't mean to click onto, and then go down a whole train of being followed around the internet by that advertiser. And that's not necessarily going to be the same sort of advertiser that is capping their frequency with broadcast television. Could be an advertiser that's just chasing clicks. And so I think to think about this subject in its entirety is really important, because there's giving the right advice to advertisers who are taking a very strategic view of their overall investment. And then there's the impact on the man on the number 13 bus, on all of the advertising that he's perceiving, seeing, hearing, and being interrupted by. Because if you watch lots of content online, you are likely to see lots more advertising than you would if you spent an hour watching television content on broadcast. You would see fewer ads per that time than you will if you look at more short form content online. So that's really, I think, the dilemma that faces us as an industry.
Well, obviously, we've got two blue chip advertisers here. And Kerry, you've been through this ISBA MOT process, which sounds rather good. So tell us a little bit about what you learnt by going through this MOT. And if every car should go through an MOT, has to, in fact, what's it like for the advertiser?
Yes, we were the first advertiser to go through the MOT, and I totally recommend it. It's been really valuable exercise for us, and actually it's pretty simple. So we had the pleasure of being interviewed by Nick Manning and Derek Morris, which is brilliant to have some real proper industry experts come into our business and get that fresh external perspective. We interviewed a smallish number of our team, so I think there was 8 in total, both at Direct Line Group, and actually they also interviewed a couple of our team at MediaCom too, and at a number of different levels in the business as well. I'm really to try and get a proper understanding of what is our system, our approach to advertising, effectiveness and frequency, and so they could understand not just at a leadership team level what our intention was and what we thought happened, but actually what was the practice of the teams that are out there working with MediaCom to buy our media. We've done a number of interviews. I did one myself. It was a real pleasure. They go away, they issued a report pretty quickly to come back to us. And for us, it was a really valuable step back to get that external perspective and to really understand what is their view of what's happening in reality, and to give us some, actually from our perspective, we came out of it really well, and to give reassurance that the approach that we're taking is actually quite systemic in our business and through our partners, and to have that external endorsement has been fantastic.
Was there anything that you've changed as a result of the MOT? I mean, maybe you learned something which you're doing well and you're going to do more of it, or maybe there was something you learned you perhaps are going to do less of.
It's certainly given us a few areas of food for thought, in particularly actually for myself thinking about, so we don't have a problem of excess frequency, but actually trying to really understand at a sort of more customer level, where are the groups of customers where actually we're probably more where we don't have, where we're missing, rather than areas that we have extensive frequency. But I think the biggest thing for us actually is having that external endorsement to come in and say, look, here's what you're doing and here's what you're doing really well. And for us in that position is like, here's the stuff we have to make sure we keep doing, that make sure that's widely understood in our teams, that we continue to reinforce certain parts of our culture and our approach, that really sort of drives that in our business. So for us, because we're in pretty good shape, it's a reminder of what you're doing that's great. And for us as a leadership team, then thinking about how do I constantly reinforce it and make sure that we continue to do that, because not only is it helping to drive perception of trust in our sector, it's helping drive our business performance.
And now, Jerry, GSK is also going through the MOT, I think, at the moment. Can you tell us a bit about your experience of it and I guess what you've learned?
Yeah, we're still going through it. We've done all the interviews and bits, and we're starting to hear some of the feedback. We are sort of have our final wrap-up meeting still in a couple of weeks. We're kind of a sucker for some of these sort of MOTs, self-evaluations. We really enjoyed being part of the kind of the PwC ISBA deep dive last year, looking at kind of where our money went. From a brand safety perspective, we've done one with the Conscious Advertising Network, really looking at in close detail at everything we have placed there. And I think in all those cases, and again here with trust and looking at these issues of bombardment and frequency, we're definitely not perfect. We don't think we have nothing in place. We think we come from a good place, but we're keen to learn what more we can do, what the opportunities are, where there are, gaps, and they could be things that we don't have enough frequency that would be interesting to find. But, I certainly think that, advertisers of all shapes and sizes can do well from kind of having a different perspective and maybe asking some questions that you hadn't thought about. And in particular with this process, I found it really helpful for just sparking some of the conversations we have with our agency, with publicists. Being able to do this sort of MOT, being able to talk about these things, it makes it very clear to them that this is something that matters to us. It makes it really clear that this is a priority. It sparks some interesting conversations in the team about, what are the opportunities here. So I really think it is a sort of a great process for advertisers to go through, the full MOT, and certainly starting to, ask, at the end of this conference, turn around and send a few emails to your agency and say, what are we doing about frequency and bombardment? What do we have in place? I think, every advertiser asking some of those questions and starting on that journey, and then come back to us in a couple of months. I'll tell you anything specific we can share.
So there you go. You heard Jerry saying this, and it's interesting to know, again, thinking about what you can do proactively, what you have been doing proactively on these things like bombardment and excessive frequency, which have been obviously an issue for a couple of years. And is there anything in particular you've been able to do to sort of persuade clients, to alert them about this?
I think this is a whole area where the question is or the sort of encouragement is be careful of the KPIs that you set, the key performance indicators that you set, because what happens, and people in advertising are very goal orientated. So you set us a target, we run off to achieve it, right? And it's a bit like the analogy could be with the exam system, where schools were set a target of getting people to get a certain grade at GCSE, and so what they did was they gamed the system to make sure that they got enough people to get the right grades at GCSE, and that was sometimes without them getting the full education that they needed. And I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but I think there's something going on like that here, which is that if all you've set your agency is short-term KPIs, if what you've done is set your team short-term KPIs, then they're probably not going to balance the whole bombardment issue and the trust equation within that. So that's probably something that's probably a good time. It's reset 2021. Have a look at those KPIs, because as Jack Welch famously said, people do not do the things that they're asked to do, they do the things that they're rewarded for. So if you're asked to be careful about trust, but you're rewarding them for effectively behaviour that leads to bombardment, then you're going to be in a world of trouble.
That's a great point, and I think a good way of bringing in a couple of different things here, because clearly context matters. So there's the bombardment and frequency in itself, and then there's the context in which it appears. And you mentioned already about sort of disinformation, and it's been a very polarized time. And Jerry, when you think about the sort of, I suppose what I would like to think of as brands being more conscious about their advertising and where it appears, how have you seen progress in this area, and maybe any progress that you feel you've personally been able to drive?
I think we've seen progress. I mean, over the last few years, conscious advertising. I mean, there was a few years ago, there was sort of like brand safety scares. I think that kind of shocked a few people into looking a bit more detail about where their money was funding. It led to things like block lists and that kind of thing, which are a sort of a step in the right direction, but potentially can be quite dangerous. And I think one of the great things about this conference is we have advertisers, we have agencies, we have media owners all together, and it takes all of us to fix that, because advertise at the end of the day, we are the gasoline that fuels a lot of the internet. We pay for a lot of the content that exists, and if you don't pay quite a lot of close attention to what you're buying, certainly in digital, you can end up by funding a lot of very long tail content, a lot of disinformation, or certainly not necessarily leaning into funding really quality entertainment, news, reporting. I think events of the year so far show us that truthful reporting is something that's quite important. We also know it's something that's in massive crisis, and that is struggling to have a model that works. And when we talk about, bombardment, an aspect of that is frequency and seeing the same advert too often. An aspect of that is, how many adverts you get hit with when you land on a website. And I think we can all agree that most websites we go to these days probably feel like they have too many adverts on them. But, publishers can't just remove half those adverts, charge the same amount for what's left, and have a working business model. If we want, news publications to reduce the sort of the load on their site, we're going to have to agree to pay more for each impression, for each each appearance that we do get there. And that requires what I think is happening, but a move towards different metrics like attention, more willingness that, to look at the effectiveness of different placements. And, there's lots of research that shows high quality media placements do drive more effectiveness. But it means that, as Sue was hinting at, that you have to go a little bit beyond just giving people a KPI that says buy me the cheapest impressions I can do. If there's an advertiser you're saying that, then of course the whole system lines up to squeeze as many adverts onto a screen as much as possible and get you the cheapest possible impression. So I think we all have to start moving in the right direction. I think a lot of advertisers are certainly branded advertisers, I guess, tend to pay more attention to that. But I think right across the industry, there's certainly more we could do. And even, things like the Black Lives Matter movement and diversity and all of that last year has certainly made people think more about this. But I don't know if we have all the solutions yet, but at least we're asking more of the right questions.
Okay, well, I'm going to say, please invest to support trusted journalism. I can say that. I mean, you've touched on it already, Jerry, but what more would you like to see this year? Here we are, we're only at the start of the year still, and it feels like the worst of the economic downturn is going to be behind us. So what would you like to see further to rebuild trust? If you have one ask or even one commitment you'd like to make, and maybe Kerry, if it's okay with you, I can start with you on that. Is there something you'd like the next step to be? You've done the MOT, so what's next?
I think for me, it's about advertisers like ourselves, like Jerry at GSK, sharing some of that best practice. We've alluded to it. There's that long tail of smaller advertisers who in many cases haven't got the resources, the skills to be able to really understand their advertising effectiveness in the way that we can. And whilst a lot of that for us is competitive advantage, actually there's a lot of it in terms of best practice and principles that we ought to start sharing in the industry to allow others. It's in our interest to help others stop as Jerry said, the sort of excessive volume of ads on certain sites and really understand how that works, so the system works for the better of everybody. And I think for us that is continue to do what we are doing and is sharing the learnings that we've got more widely in the sector, so that other advertisers who don't have access to the resources that we do can think about how to apply that to their businesses.
Yeah, it makes me think maybe there should be some kind of award for less, not sure you could say less bombardment, but limited restraint. Jerry, so what is anything further you'd like to see, maybe a realistic proposition that the industry could do to rebuild trust this year?
Oh, I love the idea of awards. Awards do motivate us as an industry, so maybe we could start to celebrate some of the steps that have gone in the right direction. I don't know. I think there's, as a company ourselves, we're doing a lot of work this year to look at quality, to look at attention, to look at what it means to be willing to pay more for a CPM because it's in a higher quality place, and early output of that. As we did a similar thing when I was at Diageo, and again we found that yes, it does pay off to be in really high quality spaces. I think it'll be interesting to think how as an industry we get around a table together and have some of these conversations. Like if we're saying we want to have websites with less ad load and more chance for a brand to shine, how does that actually happen? How do you actually do trials? How do you actually get advertisers to pay and test and learn that? And it's tricky because advertisers will say we want this, and then we will also issue an RFP saying we want things to be as cheap as possible. But I think we all have to kind of move and look for solutions together. If nothing else, to support journalism, I think would be a key thing for us to support this year. Entertainment, lots of other quality content that would be great to support as well.
Sue, I'm going to ask you what you'd like to see the industry do, and I'd actually given you interact with media owners and platforms. Anything in particular from them you'd like to see? They're not represented here.
I've got an ask and I've got a pledge, a promise as well. So the ask is that we consider as an industry the marketing of marketing, the advertising of advertising. We don't go out there and talk about its role for good, its role for creating jobs and sustaining businesses. And I think that, why not? You know, that's something that we should consider as an organisation. I promise that I will be talking more about the sustainability of our industry in general. And for me, that means sustainability in the sense of the long-term future of media owners, of quality content providers. I think that that's something that we perhaps haven't thought about enough because we've been very focused on return on investment, and the two things aren't always linked. You know, they're not, they don't always go hand in hand. And I think we need to start thinking about what we want for our industry for the very long term, because we are required to think about what we want from society, for society, for the very long term in order to build trust.
And just to build on that, I think it's such an important point around the fact that we don't advertise advertising well, and there are lots of issues that face marketing. But, you know, things in the future like around data and privacy and all sorts of things where marketers do a very bad job of communicating the positives and the upside, and that advertising pays for content, and that, you know, good use of data stops bad things. So I think, yeah, we could do better. There is a comms solution, and we are a comms industry.
Yeah, and Kerry, a last word from you on that?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And it's really important for us, not just for public perception, but also thinking about how do we bring new generation of talent into the industry as well, that they really see the advertising industry as a force for good, which we all know it can be.
All right. Well, I believe the first way to tackle a problem is to talk about it. So thank you very much indeed to Kerry, to Jerry, and to Sue for this panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.